Welcome back to the Meeting Point English for another grammar lesson. In this lesson we'll be talking about perfect tenses, looking how to use the present, the past and the future in both simple and continuous forms. First, let's look at the present perfect. The present perfect is used to talk about past events in a way which expresses a connection to the present. Now, this is true whenever we use the perfect tenses. It talks about a time and how it connects to another time. So let's look at these examples. Charles Dickens wrote some great books. J.K. Rowling has written some great books. Now, you can see in the first sentence we're using a past simple, whereas in the second sentence we're using the present perfect. Now, why would we do that? For the simple reason that Charles Dickens is dead. J.K. Rowling is still alive, so she can continue to write more books. So we see her life as being connected to the present. Whereas Charles Dickens, as he died a long time ago, he does not have the same connection to the present tense, so we cannot use a present perfect. We have to use the past simple. I'll elaborate further in a moment. Here is an example of the way that we can use the present perfect when we're talking about our experiences in our lives. I have been to China. John has never seen Star Wars. In both of these sentences, we don't mention any period of time. So we're presuming that we're talking about somebody who is still alive and somebody who still has the opportunity to either return to China or to watch Star Wars. We're talking about experiences in life in these situations here. Now, recently I've uploaded a video on the present perfect and how it compares to the past simple. But we'll begin here with some more explanations because I've come up with some graphic illustrations to demonstrate. So let's take the I have been to China sentence. Now, this orange bar here represents my life, and over to the right there, that's me speaking. And I say, I have been to China. So this sentence is referring to at some time in my life. And as long as I am still alive, I still have the opportunity to return to China. In this sentence, there is no time period mentioned, so we just presume I'm talking about in my life at some time. Whereas if I use this sentence, I went to China 2 years ago. Now, 2 years ago is in the past. It doesn't have the same connection to the present. So here the orange bar represents 2 years ago. Now, in the first sentence, I can go to China again in my life, but I can't go to China again 2 years ago. You see how 2 years ago is separated from the present. It doesn't carry that same connection as in the previous sentence. I went to China 2 years ago. Here's another illustration. I have been to the gym this week. Okay, so here this orange bar represents this week. And if I am speaking this week, obviously that is connected, so I can use the present perfect. If I say this sentence, I went to the gym last week, you can see the orange bar here represents last week. I cannot go to the gym again last week. I can only do it again this week. So last week is not connected to the present in the same way as this week is. So if I use a time phrase like last week, I'm going to have to use the past simple. I went to the gym last week. And another example. In this sentence, I'm using this morning. Now in this illustration, we've got 3 bars, and the bars represent the morning, the afternoon, and the evening. Now in this one I'm talking about this morning. Now if the time I am speaking is in the morning, I can say he has drunk a lot of coffee this morning. But if the person speaking is speaking in the afternoon or the evening, and they're talking about this morning, you see the same connection is not there. That would be in the past simple, because you cannot continue drinking coffee in the morning. So we have to say he drank a lot of coffee this morning. You see how the connection to the time that's mentioned is important when we're using the present perfect. One more example. If someone says she has lived in Paris for 3 years, because of the connection that is often implied with the present perfect, if somebody says this sentence, I suppose that the activity of living in Paris started 3 years ago and is still true today, because there must be a connection because this person uses the present perfect. If somebody said she lived in Paris for 3 years, I think that connection is broken. So she does not live in Paris now, but she lived in Paris for 3 years at some time in the past. But I don't know when she lived in Paris. Maybe it was 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, maybe in the 1930s, I don't know, but it's some time in the past, and it was for the duration of 3 years, but I don't know when. The first sentence, she has lived in Paris, is definitely connected to the present. So those are a few graphic illustrations to show you the difference between the present perfect and the past simple. Now we have to go on to compare the use of the simple and the continuous forms of the present perfect. Now, I can say this sentence, I have cleaned the car. I have been cleaning the car. Neither of these sentences has any time mentioned. But when somebody says, I have cleaned the car, the emphasis is usually on the completion. When people use the continuous form, they're emphasizing the activity, or sometimes the duration of the activity. Quite often you will get something like, I have been cleaning the car all morning, or for the last 3 hours, or something like that. But it's emphasizing the activity more than the completion. So with the second sentence, we don't know whether this is completed or not. We're only talking about the activity. And quite often this continuous form is used when there is some evidence in front of us. So if somebody comes into the room very hot and sweating, you say, what have you been doing? And they say, I have been running. If you walk into the street and the road is wet, you say, it has been raining. Okay, because you're emphasizing the activity that has been in progress rather than emphasizing the completion. This man here, you see, he has been working in the garden. He's wearing that hat, he's wearing his gardening gloves, and he's leaning on a tool of some kind. So he has been working in the garden. And these girls, they have been watching a sad film. You see, they are crying. There is some kind of evidence for us to see. So we are referring to the activity that was in progress that caused this to happen. The reason that they are crying and the reason this man is wearing his gardening clothes, we use a continuous form to emphasize the activity. Now, quite often you'll see sentences with numbers in them, and often when there is a number mentioned, there is more emphasis on the completion. So I have read 4 books this week. Now this sentence is technically possible, but it would be unusual because, like I say, the simple form emphasizes the completion, whereas the continuous form emphasizes the activity. So the second sentence, I have been reading 4 books this week, sounds like you have 4 books in progress at the same time. And you started book 1 then you read a bit of book 2, and then you read a couple of chapters of book 3, etc. But you're not finishing anything. So grammatically possible, but it would be a very unusual thing to say. Usually when there's a number mentioned, we're normally talking about the completion of that number. So here is a picture of a child with very dirty hands. And you might ask me, what has she been doing? And I can tell you that they have been baking cookies. Or I can say they have been having fun, with an emphasis on the activity. Or I might say they have made a lot of cookies, using the present simple form to emphasize the result. Another aspect that we could look at when comparing simple and continuous forms is this. She has lived in Paris for 3 years. Okay, as we've seen, this is something that started 3 years ago and we presume is still true today. But we can also say she has been living in Paris for 3 years. And often this continuous form often has a more temporary feel to it. If you think about the present forms, he lives with his parents. We often use the present simple to show a fixed state, something that is habitual always. But he is living with his parents also sounds more temporary, like he's just returned from university and he is living with his parents until he finds his own apartment. So this continuous form often sounds a little more temporary as well. So let's look at the present perfect and how it relates to the past perfect. So let's look at this scenario. Jane invites John to go to the cinema. John says that he has seen the film. So he has seen, present perfect. So we're talking about something that occurred in the past, but how it connects to the present. That's why it's the present perfect. It is a previous time that connects to the present. Now, if we imagine this whole scenario took place a year ago and do it in the past tense, Jane invited John to go to the cinema and John said that he had seen the film. That is the past perfect. You see how has changed to had. He had seen the film. So we're already talking about something happening in the past, but we're talking about a previous activity of seeing the film and how it connects to a past time. Rather than connecting to the present, as the present perfect does, this one is something previous happening and how it connected to a past time. So it functions in a very similar way, but it's more for reporting a story from the past. Some people refer to the past perfect as the past of the past. Now let's look at a past perfect in simple and continuous forms. She had written a book. So that is something that had started before that time in the past. But we can emphasize the completion by saying she had written a book. Whereas if we do the continuous form, again our emphasis is more on the activity. So she had been writing a book for 2 years. So we're emphasizing activity by using a continuous form. And if we move that same idea into a future, we can use the simple form. By July, I will have written my book. For this future perfect, we often have by July or by 2050 or something like that. By with a future time in the sentence. By July, I will have written my book, meaning it will be completed. Or I can say I will have been writing my book for 2 years. There's the emphasis on the activity and the duration 2 years. So there we have it. That's all you need to know about the present, the past and the future perfects, both in simple and continuous forms. I hope that was useful to you, and I'll see you in a future video.